Please welcome to the Creative Morning stage, Jack Hannibal.
That was a great introduction. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, you are a beautiful crowd. They were in line. So when I was 21, I was in the Broadway production of Shakespeare's Macbeth. The play starred Glenda Jackson and Christopher Plummer. At the end of the play, when the English army comes to overthrow Macbeth, when Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane, it's led by General Seward, and I played his son, young Seward. I had this great scene on the battlefield with Macbeth, and we fought with broadswords, and then he murdered me. And it was, at the time, it was the most highly anticipated show coming into New York. We'd been out on the road for a bunch of months, and it was without a question the pinnacle of my career. And I remember opening night, we had come down and I was standing with the company, we were taking our bow, and we were in this gigantic Broadway theater, and it was, you know, just a sea of black tie and evening gowns, and everyone was on their feet giving us this standing ovation. And I just had this sinking feeling in my stomach, and I remember thinking, oh my God, I have made a mistake. So I grew up in East Hampton, Long Island, and if you don't know it, East Hampton is a very small town with a very big reputation. On the very eastern end of Long Island. I'm the second to youngest of 5 kids. We were a good, solid family. And yet, at the same time, within our family, there is what I'll describe as a very deep running river of unhappiness. And this river ran on both sides of our family. If you did a genealogy and you put, my mom's family going from Boston back to Ireland on one side, and my dad's family going from Boston to New England to Nova Scotia to Scotland, you would see a bunch of wonderful lives. And you would also see this river running through on both sides and finding expression in all manner of ways in different people's lives. And the way that river expressed itself in my life is very early on, I became convinced that I was unworthy of being loved, and that the love that I had for other people was unwanted. So I had this experience early on of being an imposter in my own life. If you ask my parents, was Jack unwanted? I'm sure they'd say something smart and funny, but they would say, no, of course not. I was adored, and I was. And if you ask my friends and the kids I grew up with, was Jack an unhappy guy? They'd say, no, I was the happiest of any of us. I was outgoing, I was popular, I was funny, I thought so, and, and all of that was true. It just wasn't as true as what I believed about myself. So I'm 14 years old, and we had this little theater in town called Guildhall, and I'm given a monologue of Hamlet's to do. And it's opening night, and I walked down to the front of the stage, and I just took a moment, and I looked out at the audience, and it was everybody from my life. My parents were there, my friends, their parents, kids from school, and something magic happened. Through the pretense that I was now Hamlet, I was able to surrender the pretense of Jack as this happy guy. And for the first time in my life, I spoke right out of this secret brokenheartedness. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, foregone all custom of exercise. And indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. The speech goes on, but for me the experience was not only was I talking out of this secret part of myself, but that it was being received. You know, the audience and their quiet and their focused attention, I could feel them feel me. And it was like they were saying, yeah, we feel that way too. We're right there with you. And in that way that you can only think when you're 14 years old, I was like, oh, I'm going to do this forever. And that's literally what I set out to do. My senior year of high school, I graduated early, and within a week, I had moved into New York City to pursue a career as a professional actor. I lived in a sublet apartment with my father. I was so unprepared for what I was doing, I may as well have just tossed myself off a cliff. You know, I was terrified of New York. It was, you know, loud and crowded and aggressive, and I didn't know north, south, east, west, and I didn't know how to take care of myself. I had no idea how to go about being an actor. You know, eventually I got a job bussing tables at a nearby restaurant, and I started interning at this theater downtown called the Circle Repertory. But mostly what I did is I just spent my days walking around the streets of New York City, or I would sit for hours on end in that apartment, just literally worrying myself into a panic about what was going to become of my life. Because if you've ever been in New York City, you know, you're literally shoulder to shoulder with millions of people. But you can also, it can be the most lonely, isolating place on earth. And to me, this felt like conviction. This felt like affirmation of who I believed myself to be inside. This is what I felt like I deserved, just being in all of these people and completely unseen at the same time. So this worry started to become panic attacks. And one night I'm at work at this restaurant, and I go to pick up a tub of dirty dishes, and there's a pop in my lower back, and this white light and pain just shot through my body, and I couldn't stand up straight. And I just put the tray down, and everything stopped. It was like the whole world went quiet. And I said to myself, okay, Jack, this is over. The way you are living is not working, and you have to do something different, or you're going to die. Now, in hindsight, that was a little dramatic. I am an actor, you know, it's like... But the truth is, you know, I was 18 years old, and that is what it felt like. I was scared for my life. I went back to the apartment, and I laid on the floor with a stack of books under my head for 2 weeks. I found out later that I had slipped a disc. And you might ask, you know, well, what about your father? You know, he was there, didn't he help you? It's a great question. It's a complicated answer that I'll say like this, yes and no. On the material level, yeah, my father was there. He'd given me a place to stay. That was huge. On the emotional, psychological level, he wasn't there at all. You know, when we are unwilling to look at the pain in our own lives, whether we are unwilling or incapable, we tend to go in one of two directions. Either we become sort of codependents and we run around trying to take care of everyone else's pain so we don't have to feel our own, or we just shut it off and we don't see anybody's pain. My dad sort of tended on that side. So one day, by chance, I pulled one of the books out that my head was on, and I opened it and I started to read it, and it was a book by the psychologist Carl Jung. Now, if you don't know Jung, in a nutshell, he was a student of Freud's, and they had this famous falling out over the meaning of the unconscious. Now, I'm going to really butcher this for the sake of time. Freud essentially said that the unconscious was this warehouse of instinctual drives, of aggression and sex. And Jung said, by contrast, that actually no, the unconscious is the gateway to the soul, and ultimately to an experience of God. And Jung would frame it like this. If you imagine the totality of your personality, what Jung would call the psyche, as a great mountain, and only the very tip of the mountain is above water, the majority of your personality extends into the waters of the unconscious. So that little bit, that little peak of the mountain, this is the conscious mind. It's actually the smallest part of us. It's the part of us that is self-aware. Right under that level is your personal unconscious. So everything that has ever happened to you, every wound you carry, every trauma, every unexpressed talent, everything that your family, your church, your education, your culture has told you you cannot be, those things all live there. And they do live. You know, we say unfelt feelings don't go away, they just get buried alive. And so they're down there. And underneath that level is what Jung called the collective unconscious. All of us here today we are the living embodiment of the entire evolution of humankind. And we carry that collective wisdom in our DNA and in our psyches. And Jung sought to prove that by looking towards enduring themes and symbols, what he called archetypes, that could be found in all the world's religions, myths, and cultures. Those energies are alive in all of us and active. And then underneath that, the final layer is what I call the animating principle of life. It's just the energy. Carl Sagan said, we are the stuff of stars. We are literally the Big Bang in human form. None of us know where we come from. We can barely figure it out while we're here, and none of us know where we go. It's a total mystery. Jung said of the process of psychotherapy that it wasn't just about becoming better adjusted for your life. It was that, of course, but it was also itself a spiritual journey. The idea is that you turn towards the suffering in your life. You turn towards what has been repressed or locked away, what you cannot feel, what your society will not allow. And you work to integrate it into your life. And literally what you're doing is you are taking that mountain of self and you are lifting it up out of the water. So more and more of you becomes conscious. More and more of you becomes present. You literally become whole, this process of individuation. You become more aligned to your own soul, and you become a more direct expression of that animating principle of life. Now you can call that whatever you want. Call it consciousness, awareness, prana, breath, God, Christ, Buddha nature, true nature. It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, words can only point towards mystery. They can never contain it. I didn't just read these books. I ate them. This was food to me that I had been hungry for my entire life. Jung was saying things that I knew in my heart. I already knew this was true. Nobody had ever said it like this. And Jung also gave me hope. In our culture, what is wounded in us, what is, deemed shameful, whatever, we're taught that this must be overcome. You must stuff it down. You must be stronger. You must be bigger than your baggage. It's all about the will. And I know that is a recipe for disaster. And what Jung said is, no, it's about surrender. It's about turning towards and letting be what is here, be here, and working to assimilate it into consciousness. So it just so happened that that book that I read, that was under my head, was an unreturned library book from the Jungian Institute in New York. It was 10 years overdue. I did not return it. But inside on the back flap, there was, the date that it had been taken out, and there was also the address of the Institute, East 39th Street. And the moment my back was better, it was the first place that I went. It's this adorable little brownstone, and I went in, and I'm walking around this library, and this woman comes up behind me. She's the librarian. She says, "Can I help you?" And I told her about the book, and she starts asking me questions, and we start talking, and she's pushing this cart, and she's taking books and putting others up on the shelf. Got around to the front desk, and she handed me these books, and she said, "I think you're going to really like these." I said, thank you, but I can't. I couldn't afford the $20 for the membership fee. And she slid the books over to me, and she said, "On your word as a gentleman." I went home, I read, I came back, we talked, she gave me more books. I went home, I read, just back and forth, back and forth. Many years later, I called her to say thank you. And she said, "I always wondered what became of you." Makes two of us. So I was in my 40s at this point, and I had become a psychotherapist. And without a hint of irony, and without missing a beat, she said, "Of course you did." So right around this time, my luck started to change. The theater company Circle Rep invited me to be part of their laboratory, and I started working in play after play after play. I had an agent, and over a period of months, I booked a slew of television commercials, and I made a bucket of money. And I knew going into the next year that I could not live another year like the one that I had just been through. I needed to do something different. So I took the money that I made and I did 3 things. I got an apartment downtown, I enrolled in acting school at the neighborhood playhouse, and I underwent Jungian therapy. And over the next couple of years while I was in school, I continued to work at Circle Rep and did commercials, and it was bliss. Between acting school and therapy, it was like I was home. Broadway, that Shakespeare play, was my first job post-graduation. And when I was standing there in that curtain call and I had that sinking feeling and that I'd made a mistake, what it was is just simply that I really thought that if I was just famous enough, if I was just rich and successful enough, that I would feel differently inside. And I knew in that moment that I didn't feel any differently. And having grown up in East Hampton, I have known a lot of really wealthy, really unhappy people. And I just knew that, where my trajectory was going, I was going to be successful, and if I went that way, I was going to be really unhappy. And I just knew I had to make a change. So it took about a year of anguish. I mean, I was just in the wilderness again, because if I gave up acting, who was I? It's who I've been, it's how I've known myself my whole life. But I finally decided that I would go to college, because I knew I was now a reader, and that if I was an old man looking back at my life, that was something that was going to bother me. So I packed up a U-Haul, and I drove out to my parents' house on the island. And as I passed that theater, Guild Hall, I remembered my 14-year-old self, and how magic that was, and how much joy I had when I first discovered acting, and I realized, that's really what I've lost. I've lost my way to that joy, that magic. And I said, Jack, you have so much training, you have more experience than most people will have in a lifetime. You can't just toss this. You have to go back to it. You have to find out what is in it that ignites you. So I went to my old English teacher, this guy named Tony Coriali, and he had been very instrumental in helping me become an actor. And I said, he was now the head of the English department, and I said, listen, Tony, I want to work with the kids. I want to direct a musical or direct a play. And he said, okay, I will hire you as artist in residence under one condition. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, a lot of kids from here circle back to East Hampton, and they never leave here. It's a very selective place. So I will hire you on the condition that when you leave here and you finish your education, you never come back here again. That was compassion. And I said, okay, deal. So I've got the 8th grade class. I had 70 students. It was insanity. What I did is I had them take Greek myths and identify the themes, contemporize them to their own lives, and write a bunch of skits. Then we put those together as the play. It was herding cats. But I have to say, 13-year-olds are the best human beings. They're right on the cusp of becoming really difficult teens, and they're not there yet. So they believe, they trust, and you're cool. It was great. The whole thing. That matters. Am I okay? Am I cool? So it's going really well, and the administration comes to me and they say, listen, this is going really well. We want to give you the special needs class as well. Can we just slide them in? I'm like, sure, great. I don't know. And they're like, well, wait a second. So we sit down and we go through each of the kids and what their particular issue is. The last kid is a guy that I will call William. And what you need to know about William is that he also came from a family with a very deep running river of unhappiness. Only his river of unhappiness made my family's river look like a dripping faucet. And the one pertinent detail is just prior to the start of this school year, William and his younger sister had been put into separate foster homes. He was like 15 or 16 in the 8th grade. He was gigantic and he was angry. And they said, be really careful. And I'm like, I'm not going near this. Except the scene that they write is all William. And it's genius. He's a principal. He comes into a classroom and he has this long monologue about drug addiction and how Katrina this underclassman, has died of a drug overdose. And Tony, the drug dealer, is in class, and he says, Tony, you and I need to have a long talk. And he calls Tony up, and the two of them walk out. It was like all the other scenes were light and funny, and this was just like a punch in the stomach. So I was like, okay, this will be great. What we'll do is we'll start light and funny. We'll just put this right in the middle. We'll just stop the play. And then we'll be light and funny again. And then we ended the play with the kids singing a song, which was just adorable on steroids. But we get into rehearsal, and I cannot get William to do the part. He's this big lumbering kid, and he just shuffles on stage, and he just like mumbles under his breath. And I'm like, no, William, like, I'm standing here, I can't hear you. They need to hear you back there. This is like the whole heart of this play. And he just kind of laughed, and then the kids would laugh at him. And then I didn't sort of know what to do, so I'd be like, all right, man, just, we'll get it next time, but try to be louder. And I just let him go. We're just getting into dress rehearsal. We're trying to run the show for time, and we're trying to tighten up the set changes. And William comes out, and he just, mumbles his thing. And I say, okay, man, try to be louder next time. But as he passes me, I see him see me, let him off the hook. It was like an instant. This whole facade of I'm just this messed up kid, it just dropped. And there was this wise old man looking at me. And I just was like, no, we're doing this again. We're going right now. I was like, everybody get back to your first positions, bring the set back on. I said, William, come here to me. He comes and he stands next to me. I don't know what I'm going to say. But I go to him. I said, William, what is this scene about to you? And he just mumbles some nonsense. And suddenly I just burst into tears. I said, no, man. No, this is about you and your sister. This is about a guy who has had something really bad happen to him, and he can't do anything about it. The only thing that he can do is try to come in here and keep it from happening to somebody else. I look at William, and it's like this switch has been thrown. He is so angry. He is like, he looks on the verge of violence. He's like gonna just crush me into the ground. But I'm into it. I'm like, yes! Yes! I said, William, everything that you are feeling right now is right. This is appropriate. This is how you should be feeling. But you have to do something with it. You cannot keep shutting it down. And what you can do right now is do this part. Now do it. So off he goes. I go, start. Oh my God. So look, as an acting teacher, as a presentation coach, I talk about presence all the time, right? What is that ephemeral thing that makes somebody that you just have to watch them? In acting, there's an old adage that says when an actor walks into the room, the atmosphere should change. That kid had it. So when we're up here, the scenes are going, and the kids are out here, they're waiting for their turn, they're like doing homework and flirting, and it's just, there's just chaos going on out there. William, he took 2 steps onto the stage like this, and the place went silent. It was like a church. And then he walked to the middle of the stage, and he turned out, and he delivered this monologue. And then he turned and he said, Tony, you and I need to have a long talk. Come with me, please. And the kid playing Tony was like, he looked at me, he's like, I'm like, yeah, go. He walks by, he's just like, I didn't know. I don't. And then William, like a pro, he just stood there, he looked at the class, and then he looked out at this audience. And it was like his presence was an indictment. And then he just turned, and he walked off stage, and the class, standing ovation. They went bananas. The girls were like, oh my God! The boys were like, yes! And I lost it. I ran backstage, and I grabbed him by the shirt. I totally, I'd go to jail for this today. I threw him up against the wall. I pointed, and I went, you did that. You did that. I said, don't you ever forget that you did that. And he was like, he didn't know who he was. There are 3 component parts to compassion. The first is that we see suffering. We see it in ourselves, we see it in each other, we see it in the world around us, we see it in the environment. And the second is that we don't just see it, but we take it on. We actually feel with, as best as we can. We go into one another's suffering and we stand there with each other. And out of that mutual coming together, there arise organically the desire to alleviate the suffering or to correct the systemic or the institutional injustice that perpetuates suffering. If you take compassion on as a life practice, you very quickly realize that none of us will ever be free until all of us are free. I don't know what became of William, and I don't know if what happened that day had any lasting impact on his life. This wasn't a movie, This was a real kid, and he had a very difficult hand. I know for myself, this guy who was convinced that he was unworthy and that the love he had to share with people was unwanted, I now had irrefutable proof in William that I was wrong. That day, William and I met on the battlefield of mutual tenderness and vulnerability. And out of that, he allowed me to help him by coaching him to play the part, which he then did. And William helped me because understanding exactly what had happened between the two of us, why that happened, and how I could then replicate that with other people, that became the central focus for my life and my work ever since. Thank you.